The rejected Omega found a wounded wolf in the barn. Unaware, he was the Alpha King's lost heir. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Elena Harper had learned early how to make herself small, the kind of small that kept you from being noticed and therefore from being blamed. The farm at the edge of the pack's land was quiet most days, miles from the central houses and the stone hall where decisions were made without her. She spent her mornings hauling buckets, repairing loose boards, and feeding animals that trusted her more than people ever had. At 5'4" and barely 115 pounds, Elena moved with a careful steadiness, pale hair tucked under a knit cap, pale skin marked only by freckles from summers spent outdoors. The others called her rejected because it was easier than learning her name, and because once a word like that stuck, it explained everything they didn't want to question. She kept to the barn at dusk, when the air cooled and the smell of hay and old wood settled her thoughts, counting the seconds between her breaths the way she had been taught by no one in particular, just instinct. That night, rain tapped softly against the roof, a gentle sound that made the lantern glow feel warmer, and Elena was closing the gate when she heard it, a low, uneven sound that didn't belong to the wind or the animals she knew. She froze, heart steady but alert, listening again, and there it was, a shallow breath, almost a whine, coming from the far stall near the stacked bales. She told herself it was probably a stray dog, told herself to leave it for someone else, but kindness had always been her flaw and her strength, so she took a step, then another, boots crunching softly over straw. The shape she found was larger than she expected, matted from the rain, eyes half-lidded but aware, a wolf with silver-gray markings that caught the lantern light like frost. He was alive, breathing, and the sight tugged at something in her chest that felt like recognition without reason. Elena knelt, careful to keep her movements slow, speaking in a calm voice she used for nervous horses, measuring distance in inches, not fear, noticing how his sides rose and fell too quickly. She wrapped her jacket around him without thinking about the cold that crept into her own arms, telling him he was safe here, telling herself the same thing. Outside the barn, the pack's lights flickered miles away, but inside, time narrowed to the simple work of care, the steady promise that she would not look away. She did not know who he was or why he had come, did not know that far beyond the fields an Alpha King searched the land for what he had lost, and she certainly did not know that the quiet choice she made in that barn would change the measure of her life. Elena did not sleep that night, not really, because every time she closed her eyes she listened for the sound of breathing behind her and measured time by the steady rise and fall of the wolf's chest. Dawn crept in pale and slow through the gaps in the barn boards, painting thin stripes of light across the hay, and with it came the familiar weight of the pack's morning routines. She moved carefully, filling a bucket with water, tearing clean cloth from an old shirt, and setting everything within arm's reach, her hands calm even as her thoughts raced. The wolf watched her with a quiet awareness that felt unsettling in its intelligence, and when she spoke, he seemed to listen, his ears shifting as if words mattered. Elena told herself not to imagine things, told herself that animals responded to tone, not meaning, yet something about him felt different, as if he recognized her voice in a way that went beyond instinct. Outside, the farm came alive with distant movement, boots on gravel, the low sound of conversation drifting from the road, and Elena stiffened as a familiar laugh carried on the air, sharp with the ease of people who never worried about being overheard. She knew that laugh, knew the voices that followed it, and she knew what came next, because it always did. Someone had seen tracks near the fields, someone had smelled a stranger's presence, and when the pack grew restless, they looked for something to blame. Elena stayed where she was, brushing hay from her knees, feeling the old reflex to make herself invisible rise in her chest, because being noticed had never brought her anything good. She stepped out just far enough to hear, keeping the barn door cracked, catching fragments of conversation about a large animal moving through the area, about protecting territory, about taking care of problems before they grew. No one said her name, but she felt it anyway, the unspoken assumption that if something unwanted appeared near the edge of the land, it belonged to her by default. She returned to the stall and knelt again, lowering her voice as if secrecy itself could shield them both, telling the wolf to stay quiet, telling him that she would handle this. He shifted slightly, favoring one side, and the sight tightened her throat, not with fear, but with resolve. Elena had lived her life being told what she could not do, where she could not go, and who she could not be, but no one had ever told her she could not choose kindness, and that choice felt solid beneath her feet now. As the morning wore on, footsteps passed the barn more than once, pausing, then moving on, and each time Elena held her breath until the sound faded. She worked steadily, offering water, adjusting the cloth at his side, noting how his breathing eased when she was close, how the tension in his frame softened when she rested a hand near his shoulder without touching. At one point, a shadow crossed the barn entrance, and Elena's heart jumped, but it was only a neighbor's dog trotting by, uninterested and gone in seconds. Relief washed through her, followed by a strange, quiet certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. By late morning, the wolf stirred, lifting his head higher than before, eyes clearer, and when he met her gaze, Elena felt a warmth she could not explain settle in her chest, steady and reassuring. She smiled despite herself, brushing a strand of pale hair from her face, and whispered that everything was going to be all right, unaware that far beyond the fields, in a place of stone and banners, a question that had gone unanswered for years was beginning to stir, drawn by a bond neither of them yet understood. By afternoon, the barn smelled of warm hay and sunlit dust, and Elena noticed the wolf had shifted closer to her side without making a sound, his presence steady like an anchor she had not known she needed. She measured time by small changes, the way his eyes followed her movements, the way his breathing slowed when she hummed softly under her breath, a habit from childhood she rarely shared. Outside, clouds drifted low and white, and the land stretched wide and familiar. Yet something about the day felt different, as if the air itself carried a held breath. Elena stepped out to gather feed, keeping her eyes down as two pack members passed on the road, their conversation turning quiet when they noticed her, then resuming with the easy confidence of people who did not expect to be challenged. She returned to the barn quickly, closing the door behind her, and leaned against it for a moment, listening to her own heartbeat settle. When she turned back, the wolf was watching her with an intensity that made her pause, not afraid but curious, and for a second she imagined words forming behind his gaze, a question waiting to be asked. She shook the thought away and knelt, checking the cloth at his side, relieved to see no fresh signs of trouble, only the slow progress of rest and care. As the hours passed, she spoke to him more, telling small stories about the farm, about how she learned to fix broken hinges before she learned how to stand up for herself, about how the barn had always been a place where she felt less alone. He listened, head tilted slightly, ears attentive, and when she finished, he let out a quiet sound that felt almost like agreement. Near sunset, a breeze carried the distant sound of horns from far beyond the fields, a signal Elena recognized from stories rather than experience, a call that traveled miles and meant something important was happening somewhere else. The wolf stirred at the sound, muscles tensing, eyes sharpening with a focus that did not belong to an injured stray, and Elena felt a flicker of unease she could not quite name. She rested a hand near him, not touching, offering calm the way she always did, and after a moment he relaxed, though his attention remained fixed on the horizon as if listening for something only he could hear. Night came softly, the sky turning a deep blue scattered with stars, and Elena lit the lantern again, its glow casting familiar shadows that steadied her nerves. She brought a small bowl of water closer, surprised when the wolf drank without hesitation, careful but confident, and she smiled at the small victory, feeling hope bloom where caution had lived for too long. Later, as she sat with her back against a wooden post, fatigue finally settling into her bones, she sensed movement beyond the barn, not footsteps but a change in the air, the way pressure shifts before a storm. The wolf lifted his head, alert but not alarmed, and Elena followed his gaze to the narrow opening between boards, where moonlight cut a thin silver line across the floor. Somewhere beyond the fields, something ancient and searching had turned its attention this way, drawn not by fear or force, but by the quiet pull of care freely given. Elena did not know that the horn call marked the beginning of a search renewed, that questions long buried were rising to the surface of a kingdom, and she certainly did not know that the choice she made to stay, to keep watch through the night, was binding her fate to a story far larger than the farm she had always called home. Morning returned with a thin veil of fog clinging to the fields, softening the world into muted shapes, and Elena realized she had slept sitting up, her shoulder pressed against the barn post, the lantern burned low but still glowing. Her first thought was of the wolf, and relief washed through her when she saw him awake, eyes bright, posture more upright than before, as if rest had stitched something back together inside him. She stood slowly, joints stiff and stretched, then moved to the small crate she used for supplies. Counting out feed and water with the same care she always gave the animals under her watch. The wolf accepted her presence without hesitation now, shifting just enough to make room as she worked, his calm trust settling over her like a quiet promise. Outside, the farm stirred to life, the distant sound of a truck engine starting, a door closing, the ordinary rhythm of a place that believed it knew all its own stories. Elena stepped out briefly to check the perimeter, scanning the fence line and the road, her senses tuned for trouble the way they had been since she was young, and when she returned, she noticed something new. A faint symbol at the wolf's throat revealed as his fur parted, not a mark of injury, but a pattern that felt intentional, ancient, and strangely familiar. She frowned, kneeling closer, studying it without touching, and the wolf met her gaze steadily, as if waiting for her to understand. Elena did not fully, but she felt the weight of it settle into her chest, a quiet certainty that this was no ordinary wanderer seeking shelter. She laughed softly at herself, brushing the thought away, because imagining more had only ever led to disappointment, and she had learned to keep her hopes practical and small. The day warmed quickly, the sun burning off the fog, and with it came renewed movement beyond the fields, riders passing in the far distance, their figures sharp against the horizon. The wolf noticed them too, his attention narrowing, ears alert, but he did not move toward the door, did not try to leave, and that choice mattered more to Elena than she could have explained. She spoke to him again, reassuring, steady, telling him that no one would take him from this place today, not while she was here. As noon approached, a neighbor stopped by the fence, calling out with casual curiosity about whether Elena had seen anything unusual, and she answered honestly but selectively, her voice calm, her posture open, offering nothing that invited further questions. The neighbor left, satisfied, and Elena exhaled slowly, aware that she had crossed a line she had always avoided, choosing discretion over compliance. Back inside the barn, the wolf stood for the first time without wavering, testing his weight, and Elena watched with quiet pride, resisting the urge to reach out, knowing that trust was built by restraint as much as care. When he looked at her then, something passed between them, a recognition that felt mutual and unspoken, and Elena understood that whatever lay ahead would not be simple. As afternoon light slanted through the boards, she felt the world shift again, subtle but undeniable, as if threads long separated were drawing closer, pulled together by choice rather than command. She did not know that beyond the hills, a king had felt the same pull, sharp and unmistakable, like a compass snapping to true north, and she did not know that the quiet barn where she stood had become the center of a story that would soon demand more courage than she had ever been asked to give. The afternoon stretched long and quiet, the kind of quiet that made small sounds feel louder than they were, and Elena found herself pausing often, listening, measuring the world beyond the barn by instinct rather than sight. The wolf moved more freely now, standing and settling with a confidence that suggested strength returning beneath his calm exterior, and when he paced the length of the stall, Elena noticed how naturally he navigated the space, careful not to crowd her, aware of her presence in a way that felt intentional. She spoke less as the day wore on, letting the rhythm of shared silence do its work, and in that silence she began to notice patterns she had missed before, the way he positioned himself between her and the door when unfamiliar sounds drifted in, the way his attention sharpened when the wind carried scents from far beyond the fields. It was protective without being possessive, attentive without demand, and it unsettled her in a way that felt strangely comforting. Outside, activity increased as word spread about a search moving through nearby lands, riders seen on distant roads, questions asked and answered with growing urgency, and Elena felt the pressure of it like a hand at her back. She stayed close to the barn, inventing reasons to remain, repairing a loose hinge, reorganizing feed sacks that did not need it, anything to justify her presence if asked. The wolf watched her with steady patience, as if understanding the tension even if he could not name it. And when she finally sat on the overturned crate to rest, he approached slowly and lay down within arm's reach, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without contact. Elena's breath caught, then steadied, and she allowed herself to sit there, hands folded, feeling less alone than she had in years. As evening approached, the sky darkened with the promise of another cool night, and Elena lit the lantern early, its glow a small defiance against the gathering shadows. She brought water again, surprised by how easily the wolf met her halfway now. No hesitation, no fear, only trust earned one quiet moment at a time. When distant voices rose near the road, closer than before, Elena felt her pulse quicken, but she did not move away from him, did not retreat into the smallness she had worn like armor for so long. Instead, she stood, squared her shoulders, and stepped to the barn door, ready to speak if needed, ready to protect the fragile peace she had built. The voices passed, drifting on, and relief washed through her, followed by a realization that settled deep in her bones. She was no longer just hiding, she was choosing. She returned to the stall and found the wolf watching her with something like approval, his eyes reflecting lantern light like quiet stars, and she laughed softly, shaking her head at herself for imagining such things. Yet when she reached out at last, resting her hand lightly against the wooden beam beside him, not touching fur, not crossing the boundary she still respected, she felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the lantern or the night air. Somewhere beyond the farm, unseen and unheard, the search drew closer, guided by signs Elena could not read. But in the barn, time narrowed again to the simple truth of presence, of standing together against a world that did not yet understand what it was about to find. The night deepened with a cool clarity that sharpened every sound, and Elena became aware of a subtle change in the barn, a sense of alignment, as if something unseen had settled into place. The wolf rose smoothly, stretching with a controlled grace that made her breath catch, and when he looked at her, the space between them felt charged, not dangerous, just awake. She felt it then, a gentle pressure at the back of her mind, like a door opening to fresh air, and she steadied herself against the post, surprised by the warmth that spread through her chest without warning. Elena had never believed the stories about bonds forming in silence, about connections that did not need ceremony or words, yet standing there she could not deny the calm certainty that wrapped around her like a promise. The wolf stepped closer, careful, respectful, stopping just short of touching her, and she realized that she could sense his intent, not in images or speech, but in feeling, reassurance layered with trust. She whispered his name without knowing why, a simple sound shaped by instinct, and his ears flicked forward as if the name mattered. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying distant scents and the echo of movement far beyond the farm, and Elena felt a pulse of concern that was not entirely her own, a ripple of alertness that passed between them. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing evenly, grounding herself the way she always had, and when she opened them again, she knew she was not alone in the way she had been before. Time moved differently after that, minutes stretching and compressing as needed, and Elena found herself aware of small details she would have missed before, the precise rhythm of the wolf's breathing, the way his attention brushed against hers when a sound passed too close to the barn. It was not overwhelming, not intrusive, just present, a quiet companion that mirrored her own steady resolve. When a lantern glow appeared briefly on the road and vanished again, Elena did not panic, and neither did he, their shared calm holding firm. She reached for the water bucket and felt a flicker of reassurance flow back to her, approval that steadied her hands, and she laughed softly, shaking her head at the strangeness of it all. She spoke aloud, more to herself than anyone else, acknowledging that whatever this was, it felt right, and the wolf watched her with eyes that reflected understanding rather than mystery. As the hours passed, Elena sensed a pull toward the horizon, not a command, but a direction, and she understood that this connection carried responsibility as well as comfort. She did not know where it would lead, only that it would not erase who she was, the rejected Omega who had learned to survive by choosing kindness over bitterness. Instead, it seemed to build upon that foundation, strengthening it, giving her something solid to stand on. Near midnight, she rested again against the post, fatigue easing into her muscles, and the wolf settled nearby, close but not touching, his presence a steady anchor. In the quiet, Elena felt a distant echo answer the pull she sensed, a powerful awareness turning toward them from far away, and though she could not see it, she knew it marked the beginning of a convergence that would soon make secrecy impossible. She did not fear it. Whatever came next would come because she had chosen to care, and that choice had already changed everything. The first sign that the outside world had finally found them came not with noise but with stillness, a pause in the wind that made the barn feel like the center of a held breath. Elena sensed it before she saw anything, a tightening of focus that brushed her awareness and echoed back with recognition, and the wolf lifted his head, gaze fixed on the far fence line, as if a familiar presence had crossed an invisible threshold. Dawn was only beginning to pale the sky when a faint glint appeared beyond the fields, metal catching light where no farm tool should have been, and Elena's heart steadied instead of racing, the bond she had come to trust settling her nerves. She stepped to the barn door and watched as riders approached at a respectful distance, their pace measured, their formation deliberate, carrying themselves with the calm authority of those who did not need to announce power to be obeyed. The wolf did not retreat. He moved to stand beside her, not in front, not behind, and Elena understood that the choice mattered. As the riders drew closer, she noticed the insignia stitched into their cloaks, an emblem she had only ever seen on old banners during festivals, a mark associated with the highest authority in the land, spoken of in careful tones. Her breath caught, not in fear, but in clarity, as pieces began to align. One rider dismounted and raised an open hand in greeting, his posture formal and respectful, eyes moving from Elena to the wolf and back again with unmistakable certainty. He spoke her name correctly, not as an accusation but as acknowledgement, and thanked her for her care, for the shelter freely given. Elena felt the words land with unexpected weight, because no one had thanked her like that before. The wolf's attention sharpened, a pulse of recognition passing through the bond, and when the rider stepped closer, he stopped at the threshold of the barn, waiting, asking permission with his stillness rather than his voice. Elena nodded once, granting it, and the rider's relief was visible, tempered by awe. He knelt then, not in submission to her, but in deference to what stood beside her, addressing the wolf with a title Elena had never heard spoken aloud, a title that carried history and hope in equal measure. The air seemed to hum as the truth settled, not as a shock but as a return, and Elena realized that the pull she had felt was not a call to leave, but a convergence fulfilled. More riders arrived, halting at the fence line, dismounting in unison, their gazes fixed on the barn with quiet reverence, and among them stood a figure whose presence bent the space around him, silver threaded through dark hair, eyes bright with restrained emotion. He did not rush forward. He met Elena's gaze first, assessing, grateful, and then looked to the wolf with a depth of recognition that made Elena's chest warm with understanding. No one spoke of loss or danger. No one raised a voice. The truth needed no force. Elena felt the bond shift again, widening, including her in the moment without overwhelming her, and she understood that what she had protected was not just a life, but a future. The figure inclined his head to her, a king's acknowledgement offered without spectacle, and Elena returned it simply, standing tall in the quiet barn where everything had begun, aware that the world beyond the fields was changing because of a kindness she had never considered extraordinary. The barn filled with a quiet gravity as more figures gathered at a respectful distance, their presence forming a living boundary that felt protective rather than threatening. And Elena sensed the moment stretching into something ceremonial, without a single word being declared as such. The man whose bearing marked him as sovereign stepped forward at last, his movements unhurried, eyes clear and steady, and when he reached the threshold he stopped, honoring the space Elena had claimed through care and choice. He spoke softly, introducing himself as Adrian Blackwood, his voice carrying a warmth tempered by command, and he thanked her again, this time not as courtesy, but as truth, acknowledging the long days and longer nights she had given without expectation of reward. The wolf shifted, lifting his head higher, and the change was unmistakable, posture aligning, presence sharpening, as if a remembered identity had settled fully into place. Elena felt the bond respond, expanding, steadying, and when Adrian addressed the wolf with his given name, Lucas, the sound of it resonated through the space like a key fitting a lock. Recognition rippled outward, the riders bowing their heads in unison, not out of fear but affirmation, and Elena understood then that the story she had stumbled into had been waiting for this moment to breathe. Adrian knelt, not in submission but in gratitude, meeting Elena's gaze level and sincere, and spoke of a search that had crossed miles, of signs followed and hope sustained, of a future that had nearly been lost and was now restored. He did not speak of blame or failure. He spoke of return. Lucas stepped forward, closing the last inch between himself and Elena, and she felt the warmth of him without touch, a silent reassurance that she belonged in this circle of truth. Adrian rose and addressed those gathered, his words measured, clear, and public, declaring before witnesses that the air lived, that the line endured, and that the life before them had been safeguarded by a woman whose rank had never defined her worth. A murmur of assent carried on the air, respectful and subdued, and Elena stood taller, not because she had been elevated, but because she had been seen. She answered simply when spoken to, her voice steady, her honesty plain, describing the care she had given and the choice she had made to protect what needed protecting. No one questioned her motives. No one doubted her account. The truth held on its own. As the light shifted toward afternoon, plans formed without urgency, arrangements offered with deference, and Elena was invited, not ordered, to step into what came next. She looked to Lucas, felt the calm certainty of his response, and nodded, accepting that the path forward would be shared. Adrian inclined his head again, this time with a small, genuine smile, and promised that the barn would be remembered as the place where the future was found, not by force or claim, but by compassion freely given. Elena took a breath, the scent of hay and sunlight grounding her, and knew that while the world beyond the fields would soon open wide, the strength that had carried her here would remain her own, intact and honored. The departure unfolded without haste, as if the land itself understood that some endings deserve patience, and Elena took a final look at the barn, the worn boards and familiar scent anchoring her even as the world widened beyond the fields. Lucas remained close, his presence steady, no longer fragile, no longer hidden, and the bond between them felt settled and sure, a quiet understanding that required no explanation. Adrian spoke with the riders, issuing instructions that sounded less like orders and more like promises kept, and when he returned his attention to Elena, it was with respect that did not waver. He told her that she would be welcomed wherever the road led next, that her choice to protect had earned her a place defined by dignity rather than rank, and he made it clear that the invitation carried no demand. Elena considered the fields, the road, the horizon, and then looked to Lucas, feeling the gentle affirmation that flowed between them. She agreed to travel, not because she was compelled, but because the path forward felt true. As they moved together beyond the fence line, the riders forming a loose escort that honored space rather than crowding it, Elena noticed how the land responded, the quiet turning receptive, the air lighter. Word traveled quickly, carried on respectful tones and careful glances, and those who had once looked past her now watched with recognition, not astonishment, understanding dawning without spectacle. Elena did not seek their approval. She did not need it anymore. The road unfolded mile by mile, measured and calm, and as the farm slipped from view, Elena felt no loss, only gratitude for the place that had shaped her strength. Along the way, Adrian spoke with her about the future, about rebuilding trust and honoring choices, and he listened when she spoke, really listened, asking questions and accepting answers without correction. Lucas stayed near, attentive and grounded, and Elena sensed the weight he carried lifting, replaced by purpose that felt earned rather than imposed. When they paused at a rise overlooking the valley, Adrian stopped and turned to her, offering a simple truth that settled like sunlight, that kindness freely given had preserved a legacy power alone could not. Elena nodded, acknowledging the truth without claiming credit, because she understood that the moment belonged to all of them. As evening approached, the sky warmed with color, and the company slowed, allowing the day to end on its own terms. Elena stood with Lucas, watching the light change, and felt the bond hum softly. Not urgent, not demanding, just present. She realized then that the rejected Omega she had been was not erased by what came next, but honored, her history woven into the future rather than discarded. The road ahead promised learning, challenge, and responsibility, but it also promised belonging shaped by choice. Adrian stepped back, giving her space, trusting the strength he had witnessed, and Elena took a breath that felt like a beginning. Somewhere behind them, the barn stood quiet, ordinary and extraordinary all at once, and ahead, the world waited, ready to be met by a woman who had chosen compassion when it mattered most. Elena walked forward with steady steps, aware that destiny had found her not because she sought it, but because she had opened a door and refused to turn away.